Alright, welcome back to another Unreal Engine 5 tutorial, and today we are further talking about blueprints, and we are specifically going to touch upon the idea of a variable and the data, right? And I think this is probably arguably the most important distinction I need to make. And to be really honest, just in my experience with teaching Unreal and teaching programming, people that understand this concept faster improve extremely well, and people that don't take the time to really understand what I'm about to explain to you struggle immensely. This does require some abstract thinking, so I think that's part of it, but please, 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 if you have any questions about this, please leave them in the comments. Please let us know. In my opinion, if you don't understand this, then everything else in the tutorial series about Blueprint or C++ will essentially be worthless to you. So really take the time to understand this because it is that important. All right, but without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about what are variables and what are data types. So before we begin, I'm actually going to draw a picture for you, and hopefully this will help our comprehension of what's going on here. So a variable is simply a container. That's all it is. Think of it like a box, right? It contains data. That's all a variable is. It is a container for data. If you look up the exact definition they'll use in computer science, it's a name or container for data that essentially tracks data and stored in computer memory. That's pretty much the actual definition from a computer science textbook, but I think that's a little bit too abstract. Just think of it as a name or container for data, right? So you have the variable, and I'll just put var for short, which is the container, and inside you have the data. Now, how this is traditionally done in most programming languages, and I'll use a dynamically typed programming language for anybody that has experience, is you'll essentially create the name for the data. So you'll have like a variable here, a variable name. Variables can be named whatever you want. They just cannot start with a number, and they cannot have a space. But everything else is fine, and keep in mind variables are cap sensitive. So if you have a capitalized letter, that is different than having a lowercase letter for pretty much every programming language. So essentially you'll have your variable name here, and then you'll use the equal sign to assign a value, and then you'll have your data here. For most dynamically typed programming languages, this is how you assign a variable, a data value to a variable. So this here is the container for whatever is here, right? This is extremely important. Please, please, if you do not understand this, you need to leave a comment now and I will answer it, because if you cannot make this connection, life will be difficult for you. All right, so going back now to Unreal, let's go ahead and reopen again the character blueprint inside the third-person template. If you are just joining us in this tutorial series here, this is the third-person game template. You just open up the Epic Games launcher, click Launch, and then click Third-Person Template, and this should pop up without this little cube here. Here, I'll delete that for lack of confusion. All right, to open up the third-person character blueprint, you're going to open the content drawer. You can either type in character in the search bar here after clicking the All folder and going here, or you can go All, Content, Third Person, Blueprints, and it's right here. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm now going to click the windows here, and I'm going to open up, let's see, actually, the details panel is right there, and then let's get the palette. Let's get my blueprint. Where is the viewport and the components and all that kind of stuff? It says it's here. I don't see it. Okay, there's the viewport. Not sure why that's like that. We'll put that. Is there more over here? Here they are. All right, sorry about that. I'm not sure why this was formatted this way. All right, so essentially, this is my viewport. This is essentially what my actor or my blueprint will look like in game. And this is the character blueprint, right? Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and close this and reopen the details panel. And I'm going to drag the details panel over here. If I can get this to dock. Not like that. What a day. Come on. There we go, like that. This is generally how I have my stuff set up. All right. Thank you for your patience on that. Anyways, going now into my blueprint, I now have this event begin play. And essentially, I'm just going to go ahead and show you here. You have this little variables tab right here. This is where you can create your variables. And each variable is going to contain data. So if I create a variable here, you'll see that here's my new variable. It is named new var. Notice that again, I can add spaces in Blueprint. But when it's compiled, it will actually get rid of this space. So that's why you're able to do it in Blueprint. You cannot do this in C++ though. Now, the data that is contained by the variable is here. So this variable will contain a Boolean data type. And this is exactly when we need to start talking about types of data. So just like in English, we have different types of words like adjectives, verbs, nouns. And then on top of that, there are different types of nouns, like a proper noun, right? So too, we have different types of data. To give you the abbreviated version of what I mean when I say data, just think of it as any information that your computer can understand, use, and manipulate. And there are different types of data, right? So in order for your computer or your game to be able to do what you want it, you need to communicate it with data that it understands. And thus, you have these different classifications of this data. And Unreal will recognize these kinds of data, right? So the variable is the container, and then this is what it contains. Now let's look at the most common used data types. Now there are many, many more, but I'm going to show you the most common ones. The first one is going to be a Boolean. A Boolean is a data type that can only be true or false. That is it. It can take no other values. Essentially, in computer science, a Boolean is anything that can only take two values, right? So binary is an entire programming language made of Booleans, 0 and 1. That is it. Simply telling a circuit to turn on or off, right? Here, you have true or false. And in most languages, a Boolean will only take true or false. To set a Boolean value to true, you'll just check the box, and then to set it to false, you'll uncheck the box. It's actually very similar to Excel. Excel does the same thing. This is named after the famous French is this Boolean, by the way. Cool little fact there. The next one is going to be an integer. An integer is something that is a whole number and its opposite, right? So this could be like number of lives. Oops, that you correct. There we go. And I recompile the blueprint, and here I can put number of lives. Now the trick here is that you cannot put something like 7.5. That is not a whole number. It cannot contain a decimal, which is what it means when I say a whole number. You can also have numbers that are opposite, meaning negative numbers. So 10 opposite is negative 10 and vice versa. That is an integer. Don't worry about the big difference between an integer and int64. We'll cover that later. The next one is going to be a float. A float is a number that can contain a decimal. So 10.45, for example, would be a float. I got to recompile this. 10.45 would be an example of a float. Essentially is a number that can contain a decimal. Not too overcomplicated there. There are some rules with the decimal and how far it can go and stuff, but we're not going to cover that today. Just think of it as a number that can contain a decimal. All right, after that, we have a string. A string is simply a sequence of characters, where a character is just a piece of information that your computer can understand. Generally speaking, in most programming languages, a string is surrounded by quotation marks or apostrophes. So traditionally, in most languages, you will have like an apostrophe here, an apostrophe here, and then whatever the string contains. These can also be quotation marks as well. But that's essentially what a string is. In Unreal, it will automatically make this into a string. But it's essentially a sequence or an array of characters. So you can pretty much type in whatever you want in the string. Hello, in most cases it's hello world, right? But it could be anything. Generally this would be like name of player or something like that. Name of player, right? And then the last one, it's not really shown here on the list, but it's going to be, as Unreal calls it, none. It's also null in other languages as well, but Unreal likes to use the word none. None means non-existence, and it's actually not a value you would necessarily assign. It's more of a value you would receive from Unreal. None means essentially that it has no idea what you're talking about and that something hasn't been assigned correctly. That's essentially what none is. So for example, if I tried to print a variable, but the variable didn't exist, I would get a none value. Now, oftentimes I get this specific question is, what is the difference between having 0 of something and having none of something? Having 0 of something implies that that object exists, or that thing that you have 0 of is in existence somewhere in the game. If you have none, that means that the game compiler has no idea what this reference is wrong, or something is wrong, and that this is non-existent. That is the big difference. So to put this more in a concrete way that you can understand, if I asked you how many horses were in this stream room with me, you would say 0. And you can't look around, but I'll tell you right now, there are no horses in this room. But if you asked me how many unicorns there were in this room, I would say none. Because as far as I know, unicorns don't exist. So that is the big difference between the int or the float value of 0 and none. None, if you have 0 of something, that means that that thing is in existence somewhere. And I just wanted to make sure I touch on that because you will see none pop up in the compiler here as you start working in Unreal, and I just wanted to make sure I covered that. All right, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this video just by doing a very simple blueprint here that prints hello world, which is arguably one of the first things you should ever do. So I'm going to create a variable here, and this is going to be message. And this message will contain a string. I'm going to recompile so I can change the default value of the string. And I'm going to change this to hello world. Then I'm going to come here to the event begin play. I'm going to grab the execution pin and type in the word print. This is going to bring up the print object here. Then whenever you have a variable, there are always 2 pre-built methods inside a blueprint for you. That is a setter and a getter. A getter gets the value, a setter sets the value. Pretty crazy, right? So I'm going to go ahead and drag this out. And as you see when I drag out, I get or send or set. I can also hold control to specify that I want to do the getter. And I can hold alt if I specify that I want the setter. Just like that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get this. I'm going to drag this out, and I'm going to connect this variable to this string here. And as you see, it immediately recognizes that this works and that this will print. So when I print the string here, this string is holding the variable message, which contains the data hello world. I'm going to say that one more time so we all understand. This is very important. When I print the string, this is going to look at message. Message is the variable name for the data, or the container for the data hello world. So hello world is what's going to print because it's the data contained by message, which is being printed. All right, let's go ahead and compile this and play the game. And as you see, hello world pops up right there. And that is pretty much the basics of variables and data types. We will talk a lot more about the various different types of data that is offered to you in Unreal Engine 5. I just wanted to get you the most fundamental ones as kind of a building block. All right, Last thing I want to show you guys here is how you can use the setter method. To use the setter method for any variable, I'm going to hold Alt here and drag this out. This creates a ability to set the value of message. I can now grab this execution pin. So when this blueprint begins, it's going to set the message here, set the variable value here, and then I'm going to drag this execution pin to print a string, and I'm going to assign the string to be whatever is contained by message, just like this. I could also do it this way as well, and I would get the same result. So either like that or like that. Remember, I'm holding Alt and clicking to get rid of that connection point. Okay, just for an example here, I'll show both. Then here, I can create what I want the new message to be. So I'll type in new hello world. Okay, and when I compile and I click save, I go ahead and play the blueprint. As you can see, I have a new hello world, and that this works the exact same regardless of how I drag a message to this pin here. Again, compiling and save, and I get the exact same thing. So this example here is exactly why you should be using variables. Instead of typing in something here, the reason why you really want to use variables is because, as the name implies, they can vary in value, which is what makes variables so effective and dynamic and why we have them. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. Again, if you had any questions on any of the concepts, please ask. Again, I will say this is my broad observation. People that understand this early on in their game development, programming, or computer science journey do extremely well. People that do not understand the concept of a variable in data struggle, because it is the essential building blocks for everything that we are about to do inside of the Blueprint visual scripting language. So again, please feel free to drop a comment if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and I will see you all in the next one.